Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to part 5 of this hands-on with Maxon C4D Level Up workshop. My name's Ellie and I'm joined once again by my good friend Matt. How's it going, Matt?
Hello, it goes okay. I don't know what's happening, but this is the first not non-sunny one that we've got. I mean, it looks like I'm being bombarded with God
It
rays
does
from
actually look
behind
quite
me,
sunny where
but
you are. I mean, I
oh,
have the
it's
blind shut. I'm being
it's just
antisocial today.
yeah, it's just overcast, so it's just wash out. Either that
Yeah.
or I'm being, this is a wonderful example of super comp and light bleed. Um,
Hey, we'd never know. Could be a really great green screen.
that's it. Yeah, I'm not really here.
I also want to say hey to everyone in the chat already. So hey to Charles, Bernd, Ronaldo, Marcelo, Jay, Frank, Brian, Joel, Mike, and James. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending where you're all based. It's nice to see you all with us. And also hey to James, Mike, and Kasha. Hey guys, how's it going? So let's quickly get into what we're going to be doing today. For anyone who's new, the idea behind this workshop is to help boost you guys as Cinema 4D artists onto the next level of your 3D journey. And we've been using version 26 for this, and also we're diving into a bit of a Redshift as well. We split this up into 6 different parts, and we are already on part 5, which to me seems crazy. I can't believe like after this week we're only going to have one more session, which is a shame, but hopefully you've been enjoying it as much as we have. So this was the breakdown. Parts 1 to 4 can already be found on the Maxon Training Team YouTube channel. If you need to have the link for that, you can find it inside the handout for GoToWebinar, or just drop us a message and we can send this to you. Not a problem. As you can see, part 5 is going to be working with color today. And in just a sec, we'll be going through what we're actually going to be covering over the next couple of hours together. Some extra stuff, just in case you guys don't know, all of our sessions get recorded. Pretty much everything we do as a training team gets recorded and it gets uploaded onto the Maxon Training Team YouTube channel, which is a YouTube channel specifically created for all of our stuff as Maxon trainers. You also have unlimited access to all project files. So again, inside of the handout section of GoToWebinar, you can find the links for the YouTube channel and the links for the project files. It's separated into the individual weeks and all the stuff you can have on there, all the models, the textures. Have it. It's yours forever. Also, I know a bunch of you have been applying for the trial license or the extension of the trial license for Maxon One. So if you haven't heard back from us, chances are it's been done. But if not, just drop us another message or another email at training@maxon.net and do make sure you have activated first and we can extend that for you. Again, we like to keep these as interactive as we possibly can. So we love to talk to you guys through the questions area. If this is the first time you're on a session, inside of GoToWebinar, there is actually a question and answer area. You can type your name, shout, hey, give us a question in there, and me and Matt will be going through those. Sometimes we answer in the background, but a lot of the time we like to try and answer them live because the chances are, if it's a question that you've asked, the likelihood is someone else wants to know that answer as well. And again, all this information can be found in the handout. And also, if you do want to share your work with us, I know a bunch of you do this already on socials, we have our very own hashtag, which is #HowMaxon. And we do keep an eye on that on things like Instagram and Twitter and TikTok. So be sure to share your work, whether it's to do with this workshop or to do with just something that you thought looked cool that you made. It's nice to see what you guys create. As we said, part 5, working with color. And so this is a bit of again, it's a bit of a broad topic, but it's nice because we get to dive into some stuff that we haven't really gone through before. So when we say working with color, no, we are not talking about like color management. We're not talking about ACEs. If you want to learn about that, I would definitely recommend Max's Maxon Color Show. So tomorrow at, I believe, 5 p.m. UK time, he has Cullen Kelly on there, and they are actually going through ACEs and color management. So if that's something you want to learn about, then definitely check that out. It's on the Maxon Training Team YouTube live stream. But today, what we're going to be doing, so we're going to have a look at some different color options inside of Cinema 4D and how we can take advantage of them to maybe make our scenes perhaps more interesting, have some more variety, and just experience and explore some more creative processes. And so what we mean by that, there's ways of controlling and adding what's called vertex color. And so Matt's going to be diving into how we can set up vertex color inside of Cinema 4D, and also how to render that inside of native Cinema 4D. So I know a lot of what we like to cover is Redshift as well, but we also thought we'd, add a little bit of the native C4D in this session, because why not? We're also going to look at, on that same kind of topic, we're going to look at how we can take vertex data and use it inside of Redshift. So we have something called the Vertex Attribute node, and what we can do is we can set up vertex maps, much like we did last week, in last week's motion session, and then we can take that vertex data and we can use it inside of Redshift to create animated textures, to blend between different materials, to just create some really interesting looking textures. And yeah, so that's going to be kind of like the first half of the session, diving into a lot of like the vertex stuff, because it leads on nicely from last week's session. And then we're also going to look at working with and setting up MoGraph color. So we're going to set up some, like a simple MoGraph setup, maybe some fields, and we're going to see how we can control that information and use it to change textures again, and use it to mask certain elements out inside of Redshift by using what's called color user data. And we're going to have a look at the other possibilities of color user data as well. So like display color, object ID, index ratio. We can use all of this data inside of materials to create some really fun and creative results. And then we also, so this is a bit of a last minute addition, we thought we'd also include coloring with lights. So this is a topic that we kind of didn't initially think of, but when we're talking about working with color, we can do what we call paint with lights, and then we can also include volumetric lighting, and we can kind of tint volumetric lighting to create different looking scenes, like underwater scenes. And we'll be doing this in native cinema as well. But if you want to see it inside of Redshift, just let us know. We can do that as well. So again, we're going to cram as much as we possibly can into these next 2 hours. So I'm going to stop talking so we can actually get into what we're going to be doing. So Matt, are you ready for me to chuck it over to
Throw the
you?
screen. Yes, thank you very much for that. And if anybody wonders why that we reiterate some of this stuff every session, it is because still in the comments of even last week's webinar, we get, I wish you'd recorded this. So
Yes,
we do try to let
like
people know that we do.
record it.
That's what we do. We record everything, ever.
We do. And just as a quick reminder, don't forget to drop your questions that you have for anything that Matt's showing or what I'm showing inside the questions area, and we will try and answer them live for you.
Obligatory question, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Hooray! Okay, so last week we looked at vertex maps. And something that came in a few versions ago, I think it was a few versions ago, is the ability of making vertex maps with color. Now, it's an interesting thing to do, to just kind of block out color and use color to, just help figure out which sections are of which bit. But with Cinema 4D's native renderer, you can actually use this vertex map, the color vertex map, to actually render stuff out. So I'm just going to give you a super brief example of how we set that up. So you need an object, of course, in order to do something with, and I've just got 10 by 10 segments, which is fine. And I need to make it editable so that I can have access to its points. Can't really have a vertex map without any points because it's not real. So with my plane selected, I shall go to my tags, and under other, you can see that there is a vertex color tag. And if I put that on, it does two things. It turns the thing black because that's its kind of base color. Three things, actually, I suppose it does. It adds the vertex color tag here to my object, which is slightly different from the vertex map one. And it gives me my paint tool. So automatically the paint tool, as you can see, means with the color that I've got, with the opacity, with everything that I have, I can paint my vertex map. And this is actually color onto my object. And then if I want to, I can change the color and I can go over it. I can override certain parts, and I can move stuff around, which is quite nice. And just change the color. And this just simply is exactly what you'd expect, which is colorizing or coloring the vertices. It is remembering this in this tag. Another thing that I did find, which I really liked with this, is you can use fields. So it will freeze my transformation that I have at the moment. So all of those is now uneditable. I can no longer paint with these at all. If I wanted to, I'd have to delete that and unuse fields. But if I wanted to, I don't know, let's grab a box field. There we go. I've created a box field that I can move around, and it is coloring those vertices that color. Now that color relates to the box field color remap, so I can change exactly the color that this works with, and wherever I put my field is where that color will be. You can have a look at the remapping as well, and you can choose the inner offset to the outer offset to see if you want to, you know, solidify things and increase and decrease strength, which is really quite cool. But wherever I move this, it will colorize those vertices. Now, at the moment, this is kind of like invisible data, and the moment I deselect, you can't see it, and the moment I render, it's not there either. What use is this, then, I hear you say? Well, what we can do, and not create a null object, wrong button, that button, we can create a new material, and in that material, you can choose, in the texture section, you can choose a vertex map. And you can do this in the color, you can do this in the luminance, depending on what sort of effect you want to have. So just for this moment, I'm going to create a vertex map texture. So this is under the little drop down, effects, vertex map, and it creates this white square. When you click the white square, it says, which vertex map do you want me to use? So you can use your little picker and say that one, or you can drag and drop. And now if I render, oh, it still doesn't work, because this is the thing I forgot earlier in a very, very schoolboy error. You need to make sure that you drag the material to the object that you want it to be visible with. So there you go. So that's been created. That is using that vertex map. So you have to still associate everything together. It won't just render directly to the vertex map. It has to have the material on it as well. And then you can press render, and it will render vertex map color, or color vertex map, sorry, as part of Cinema 4D's native renderer. Now, there are certain use cases for this. Sometimes 3D scanned objects will do things with vertex color or color vertex rather than some form of UV map or UV texture and things. So this might be a way of quickly editing, or this is just a quick way to give stuff block color if you don't want a lot of information. But that is a super fast use of color inside of Cinema 4D using a sort of progression of what we did last week with vertex maps. Any questions on that? That really was super fast.
Let me have a quick look. I don't think so. Still just saying hey to everyone. Oh, actually, so could you show where we can find vertex color again, please?
Yep. So you have your object selected, tags, other, vertex color.
Cool. We have a few coming in now, actually. So Ruben was wondering what happens if you add more faces after you create the vertex color map?
From my previous experiments, the answer is a mess. Because
Good answer. Your audio has gone for me, but I don't know if it has for everyone else. Can anyone else hear Matt? No audio. Okay. Your audio has gone. Thanks, everyone. Matt, I don't know if you can hear me now either. Matt has gone into the matrix, yes. Okay, so this is strange. I'm not sure. I don't think he can hear me either, which is very strange. Let me see if I can get his attention. I don't think he'll be able to see me either. Can Matt see the chat? He can. Let me see if I can message him privately. We can't hear you. I don't know if he can hear me. This is great. Sorry everyone for this fun technical stuff. I'm waiting for him to be like, we can't hear you. Let me message him privately. Sorry about this, everyone. Let me see.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes. Oh, sorry. That entire time we couldn't hear you, but I don't think you could
Brilliant.
hear me.
No, I couldn't
Yeah,
hear you either.
yeah. So we were, I mean, the chat were enjoying it, I'm sure. I even
Yeah,
tried to
I can
message you on
see.
Teams. I was like, can't you? And I was
I have
thinking,
no
you
idea
can't,
what
because you
happened there.
can't. No, I don't know. So it like went, and I thought, okay, I'll try and talk to you. And then for anyone who doesn't know, when you're sharing your screen on GoToWebinar, you then can't see the other person's camera. So I was
No.
trying to. So really, I might have to cut us out of that because I was like this, like we can't hear you.
Oh dear. In short, the vertex map stays intact. You missed all of my
We
rant.
missed it all. I was
I'm
I
very
was wondering what to do. I was like, how can I message you? But I know obviously Teams do not disturb.
How strange.
Oh dear. It's okay. I was trying to fill the noise with my rambling nonsense.
Was it good? Were you able to talk over my demonstration? Because that's quite bizarre.
I wish I was good enough to have narrated what you were doing. I'm not quite that in sync, but maybe next time.
Yeah, never mind.
Okay, should we take to it?
I suppose in short, the answer was that my vertex map remains in exactly as it was with the color channel, which was incredible. So that you can add geometry, and it does its best. And that there are some great quality of life things that have, sort of been improved with vertex maps and colors, so that when you do add geometry, it makes it work, which is great. So hopefully to answer that question, yes, there it goes.
Cool. That's really cool. So there's another one from Chris asking about can this vertex color displace the geometry? I know we discussed that when we covered vertex maps. So I would do it.
No.
Yeah, I don't know.
There's only one way to find out. Fight.
Yeah.
Oh no, something else.
This is what happens. If we don't know an answer, we just press a couple of buttons
Let's
to see if it
figure it
works.
out. So I want the displacer. I want to just add a color, don't I? So that needs to do that, and then the fields needs to use the vertex map. Apparently so. So it will only displace, I mean, let's kind of where there was color, but it doesn't seem to differentiate. I don't think it quite likes it.
No, I would stick to
The standard vertex map for displacing and stuff. Yes, agreed.
Absolutely. Right. Let me see. So Andrews was saying, are these C4D materials compatible with Redshift? Well, there is a slightly different method when working with Redshift, which we will actually be doing in just a couple of minutes.
Yep.
One final thing, Joel was wondering, can you connect the vertex color to the box field? I think.
What do you mean? It is connected. That's what it's doing.
So is the box field what's controlling that blue color?
Yeah.
Sorry, I missed that bit. So yes, absolutely. Cool. Right. So I think, yeah, so Charles was saying it sort of looks like the color is mapped to the strength of the displacement.
Yeah. Oh, Joe wants to know how I did that part. So under the vertex map, you can go to tags, you can use fields. Fields gives you the standard thing, and then you can create any particular type of field that you want. So let's create a box field. It's created another box field, and you can use the color remap to change the color. So that's how you do that bit. Right.
Cool.
And now I will throw the screen at you.
Yes, and we will be doing a Redshift, not a Redshift equivalent, but we're going to look at how we can take advantage of our vertex maps that we did last week, and do it inside of Redshift. Cool. So standard question that I have to ask. Can you see my screen?
We can.
Good stuff. Cool. Right. So let me just move this out of the way so I can see what I'm doing. Cool. Right. So yeah, let's have a look at vertex maps and how we can control textures with vertex attribute data. So we're not going to worry about creating kind of the most advanced vertex map here because we did that last week. So if you want to learn about vertex maps, let us know. We'll link you to last week's session. But this is more about using that data to control materials and textures and fun things like that. So let me I was sort of working on a project. So let's just open this one up. And let's do something really simple, like just grab my cube, get rid of that, get rid of that. Okay, cool. So yeah, really simple setup that is literally just a cube, some lights, and a camera, because it already looks quite nice. So I thought it'd be a nice little starting point. So for the purposes of this, the main idea is we're going to be inside Redshift materials. And for anyone who's never used Redshift materials before, we use nodes. So if you are brand new, that's cool. We're gonna go at a nice slow pace, and we're gonna hopefully dive into some node materials together. So the first thing I'm going to do, if anyone's seen my sessions, I like to work it with the Redshift render view. And so that is this window here. The Redshift render view is basically a second window that is going to give me a progressive preview of my render with my Redshift materials and my Redshift lights. So I like to dock it alongside my viewport. So I have my viewport that I like to work around in, and then I have my render view, which shows me all the coolness that we're creating. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to start my render view. So I guess it would be worthwhile also showing the IPR just in case. If you're short on room or short on space, you can also use what's called the IPR. And what it's going to do, it's going to convert your viewport into the Redshift progressive renderer. So if I go on start IPR, we now have this inside of here, and I can move around my scene. And if I change some textures and add a new light, it's going to update for me. So yeah, if you're short on space, IPR. If you are like me, I like to use the render view, but it is absolutely personal preference. There is no kind of right or wrong answer here. So let me just kind of bring that back into here. Okay, cool. So yeah, as we said, super simple setup. All I've got is this cube here that I think it was sort of like 70 by 70 by 70 segments, and I made it editable because if we're creating a vertex map, we have to have access to the points, which means we have to be using a polygonal or editable object. So what can we do here? So let's just set up a really simple vertex map. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to select. So I'm also in points mode. So this is really important. I've got my cube selected. I'm in points mode. And I'm going to go to select, set vertex weight, and I'm just going to set my value to 0%. Everything's going to go red. And then I also have my vertex map tag in here. And so we can do a few different things. We can paint on here, which we'll look at in a sec. But for now, as we said, we just want to have a really simple setup, and then we can look at how we can then create our material. So I'm going to use fields. I'm actually just going to get rid of this. So I'm going to get rid of my freeze layer, which is in by default, and I'm going to use just a spherical field. So I'm going to drop in my spherical field, and then I'm just going to make this a bit smaller, and I'm going to move this maybe out here. Cool. So we've got this little, so we've got our vertex map set up. So we have our yellow area, and then we have our red area. And what we can now do is we can take that information and take that data, and then we can use it inside of Redshift, and we can create different colors and shaders and blending inside of our node editor. So let's look at how we can do that together. So the main thing here, if you have just opened up Cinema 4D and you are following along, in order to use Redshift and to access Redshift materials and Redshift lights like we do here, we do need to change our renderer to Redshift. So we can do that by clicking our render settings, which is this little button up here. And then if you've opened up Cinema 4D, chances are yours says standard. So all you need to do is change that to Redshift. And then it's going to adjust your palettes. So you now have Redshift lights. And then now when I create materials, I'm going to be creating Redshift materials. Right, so let's open up our material manager. So I've already got some materials here from tests I was doing earlier, but we're going to create a brand new material. So when you click, you get a Redshift material inside of here. However, there is a new standard material inside of Redshift, and without going into too much detail about it, I'm going to be using the standard material, and I'd recommend you guys, if you're used to using Redshift, I'd recommend using that as well. So the way that we can create a standard material, because unfortunately at the moment when we double click, it still defaults back to the original material. We can come into Redshift materials, and down the bottom we have something called a standard material. And don't confuse this with Cinema 4D standard material. It is the Redshift standard material. So we have this here, and what we're going to do, we're going to call this Vertex Color New. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to drop my material onto my cube. And so we can now see we have a grey cube going on. So nothing exciting just yet. And so to access the information and to start to mess with some stuff inside of my node editor, all I need to do is double click my material. And then it opens up a node editor. And for anyone who's not seen a node editor before, don't worry, don't be scared. All this is a Redshift standard material node. And inside this node is how we can control certain base properties like reflection, roughness, color, and some other interesting things. But those are sort of like the main ones for now. And then it connects to an output, and the output is what controls the surface of our material, or surface of our object. So these are the two nodes we have for now. And so we're going to go into this type of stuff in a lot more detail next week when we do the Redshift session. But for now, this is kind of what we're looking at. And this is Cinema 4D's node editor. So this is the important thing. So it might look a little bit different to the Espresso shader graph that you're used to using. So how do we use this vertex map data? And how do we start to change some colors? Well, let me dock this down here just so we can see everything that's going on. I like to try and show you guys all the windows that I'm using. Okay, so inside of here, the way that we can create a new node is by double clicking, and the node that we need for our vertex maps is something called Vertex Attribute. So it's nice because it's already labeled vertex. So you think vertex map, vertex attribute. And so we've typed in vertex, and so now all we need to do is drag and drop this into our node editor. And we've now brought this into here, and we have our attributes of our particular node on the right-hand side, where we're used to the normal attributes of everything inside of Cinema. So what we need to do, we need to define the attribute name, and all that is the vertex map tag that we just created. So on here, we have our vertex map tag. All we've got to do, drag and drop that into here, and nothing's going to happen yet because we still only have this sort of node tree set up. But if I solo my vertex attribute node and you look in our render view, you can now see we have sort of a bit of a difference in color going on. And so where my spherical field is, and aka where my vertex map is yellow, we can see we have this little white dot, this little white area. And then inside the stuff that is going to be red, we can see is black. And so what it's doing, it's converting our vertex map weight, so our yellow and red, our weights between 0 and 100, to black and white or grayscale information. Once we have that information, we can now use it to control a variety of different things. So first of all, we can plug this into our color. And so now we're controlling this standard material color with our vertex attribute. We can then colorize this, so we can control these colors by dropping what's called a ramp. And a ramp can be used for a variety of different things. It can be used to colorize, we can control black and white values, we can adjust a lot of different things using this particular node. So if I drop this into here, I then come down and I can then change my colors. So say, let's make one red and make one blue. Now what's happening is we have colorized our vertex map, which is then controlling the diffuse color of our material. So now wherever this spherical field is, we're going to get this other color. And so what if we change this vertex map so we made it grow like we did in last week's session? Well, then what we can do, if we just sort of pull that in here, make it a bit smaller maybe, we can grab a freeze layer. And if we set this to grow, we then can create our vertex map growth. So you can see inside of here, we're growing this out. And we can make it a bit more interesting. So that's going to be a little bit fast. So let's control our effect strength maybe to 50. So this is going to slow down our growth effect. And then we can make it more interesting by adding a, what do I want to do? Adding a random field. So again, a bunch of stuff that we covered in last week's session. And I'm just going to change a few things. So I changed my blending mode to overlay and I've changed my noise type and scale. And so now if I just sort of pull this down a little bit and we sort of come out of our camera, we have a bit more of an interesting growth pattern. And now if we come into here, this growth is also, because we're still using that same vertex map, it's controlling those changes of color. And so if I played this through, we can see that that blue color is going to gradually overtake the red because the blue color is representing this yellow area. So from here, this is pretty cool. Like, this is cool on its own, being able to control and change two different colors. However, the downside to this workflow and the downside to the way that we've set it up is we only have one set of base properties. So both our red and our blue colors only being controlled by, or can only have one certain amount of base properties. So let's say I wanted my red to have no roughness, but I wanted my blue to be super rough. So I want to be glossy, I want to be rough. With this particular setup, we can't actually do that because I can only control my roughness value inside of here. So either both going to have no roughness or they're both going to have full roughness. But there is a way that we can set it up so we can then have two different materials or multiple different materials, and then we can use the vertex data to mask between the two, and then we can have a different set of properties for each one. So we're going to have a look at that. I'm going to use the same sort of like setup here. So we're going to keep it nice and simple, but we're going to look at how we can now set this up so we can have multiple different materials with different properties. So let's sort of just play this through a little bit, just so we have a cool looking shot. Cool, so we have this going on. Right, so how do we set this up? Well, I'm gonna just sort of remove this branch by double clicking, and then I'm going to delete my ramp. So my first material here, let's do the same thing. Let's do the same colors. We're going to do red and blue. I keep it nice and simple. So we have our red material here, and we're going to make this red let's make them like really like blatantly different. So let's make this a metal material. So we can make it metal by adding a metalness value, and then let's just add a little bit of roughness. So it's a bit of like a brushed metal. So this is our first material. We have a bit of a metal red material going on. Now let's set up our second material. So this is going to be sort of like animating and be the next material. And so I'm going to command click and drag, and it's just going to duplicate my material. Or I could double click and add another standard material if I wanted to. But duplicating is always a faster way of working. And then let's just make this our nice blue color. And we're going to make this, we're going to have like no metalness. And a little trick, if you want to see what this texture looks like. So at the moment, we can only see our red material. And that's because the red one is plugged into our output. So if I want to see this one, I can hit this little S key. So if I just sort of come in here, we have this little S button, and this stands for solo, and it's going to solo this node. So if I hit the S key, we now have our blue sort of plasticky material. Maybe we make it a bit more rough, just so we can sort of differentiate between the two. Okay. Right. So from here, how do we now combine these two textures together and then use the vertex attribute and the vertex data to create that difference and that change in textures, sort of similar to we had before, but now with the different base properties? The way that we do that is well, there's a couple of different ways, but the way that I'm going to show you is by doing something called material blending. Material blending has so many incredible purposes, not only this, or for masking, we can use it in color user data to define different materials. We can use it to, if you had like surface imperfections or scratches, or you wanted something to be a different color, we can use it for all of those amazing purposes. So what we need to do, we need to put our material blender between our standard material or our material nodes, but before our output. So it's going to go in this area here because there's an order of process inside of nodes, and sort of, for me, it goes left to right, ending on the output. So I'm going to double click, and I'm going to search the word material, and it's going to give me everything that has those letters in. And we have something called a material blender. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to drag it over this branch here. So over, let me just sort of move this down. So we've already got a connection here. And because I want it to go in here, what's great about Cinema 4D's node editor that you can't do in the shader graph is you can actually drag and drop, and it's going to do those connections for you instead of having to, you know, drag it in, connect my nodes, etc. So it's a nice way of working, being able to just drag and drop it onto an already existing branch. So if we look inside of our material blender, we have a couple of different options. So they're all the same thing, all the sort of the layers are the same thing. So we can actually hide away all of these different layers, because you can see we can have up to 6 different, well, technically up to 7 different materials, including the base material. So inside of our base material, we have plugged in our first material here, which is our red metal color or texture. So that's plugged straight into here. We can now see this is locked because we've plugged in our Redshift standard material, which is this one. We then have another layer. So we have layer 1, which is asking for a color and a blend color, and then we have something called additive as well, which is a bit of like a sort of like a multiplier in Photoshop. So what we can do, we can plug in our second material, which for us is going to be sort of our plasticky blue material. We need it to go into our layer 1 material color. So that's what we just saw down here, layer 1 material color. That's all that is. So let's do that. It's now connected, and we can now see inside of here that this now has our blue texture. Okay, so we've completed pretty much most of the process. The only bit now is to connect our vertex map and our vertex information. So let me just give myself some room. So again, we've still got our vertex attribute. It was the same one we were using before. We haven't changed it in any way. It's just the vertex attribute node with that existing vertex map in, which is this vertex map here. So again, if we solo it, we're getting black and white values, and these values are really important inside of Redshift. They can be used to control so many different things. In our case, we're going to be using it as a blending mask. So when it says blend color, it effectively means a blending mask. So you know in Photoshop, when you create, I don't know, a layer and then you add a mask to it, white does something, black does something. This is the same thing. Our white and our black values are going to be masking between our two colors inside of our material blender. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my output color. So I'm basically going to plug my vertex attribute. I'm going to put it over my material blender. And what we need to do is we need to define and we need to control our layer 1 blend color, because that's where we've added our second material. Layer 1 blend color. And now we are blending between our two materials. So our base color is our red. So if we start at the beginning, we can see that we have our red material. And then as our vertex map grows, our second material, which is our blue, is going to grow as well. So do we have any questions on that before we kind of like move on to sort of just like the next vertex map stage? Go on, what we got?
So I was just waiting for a nice part to sort of interrupt you.
Point.
Mike has asked, what is the difference between an RS material and an RS standard, and when should you use one or the other?
Okay, yeah, it's a good question. Good question. So let's just sort of like remove this all for now, so I can show you on the big screen. So prior to the last release of Redshift, so the release that came in April, the default material, the default what you'd refer to as the standard material, was, when you double click, this one here. So if I double click this was, if we're talking pre-April, pre 3.5, this was the material setup. So if you wanted to create a material that wasn't anything kind of you know, dramatic, like a volume or incandescent or things like that, if you were just looking at creating a normal material, this would be your starting point, your starting base. And inside of this Redshift material node is where you would control the base properties of your material, your texture. So if we have a look down in here, so these are our attributes. If we sort of give me a little bit more room here, you can see what we have. So when I select my Redshift material, we can see all of our base properties here. And so we have the control of our diffuse roughness. We have something called backlighting, reflection, sheen, refraction. This was the standard way of creating materials. As of 3.5, we have a new Redshift standard material. And so when I double click this, so you can see they're named slightly different. So we have Redshift material, RS material, Redshift standard, RS standard. And so if I then click this node here, so this is our new Redshift standard material, and we have a look at our base properties, you might notice that they are slightly different. So inside of our base, we have different options. For example, different diffuse models. We have a metalness value. We have thin film, we have coating, emission, as well as some other advanced settings. This workflow is what you would call a more industry standard workflow. So if anyone's used Arnold Renderer, their standard material is based on this. It is a much more efficient, optimized, and industry standard way of creating materials. So there is no, I guess there's no kind of like when you would use one over the other. My personal recommendation would be, if you're working in Redshift, I would recommend creating your materials using the Redshift standard material. I believe that is probably the way that things will be going. It also helps when it comes to converting materials, because it is a standard material. So I believe when it comes to working with Redshift and other DCCs, you can bring your materials across. I also believe if you had materials from other sort of renderers that are built in this way, you can then convert them, because the properties are then all the same. So that my personal advice would be to just start using the Redshift standard material. The only downside, I guess, is Redshift material, we still have our nice little presets, but these can be made really easily inside of the standard material. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Could you quickly show how you combined the random and spherical fields again? I think it's like the question of the blending layers.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, so we started with just our spherical field, which was creating that initial little kind of area. And what we can do, this is great because you can animate it in. For the purposes of this, I was more focused on the material as opposed to the actual vertex map creation. And then we used our freeze, which allows us to create like a growing effect if we change our mode. And then I like to use my random field just to add some sort of random variation to the way that our growth happens. So if I sort of come all the way in here, I switch it off, we can see we just have just like a standard spherical like blend happening, because all that's controlling this at the moment is just the spherical field. Whereas if we sort of overlay a random field and then control your noise type, for me, I just select epoxy and then we can adjust our scale. So we have different like scale values going on. And then now we just get that slightly more random growth happening. So it just makes it a little bit more interesting when it comes to working with vertex maps.
Cool, thank you. Emil has asked if we wanted to swap the colors round, is there some sort of can I pipe in some sort of invert map? I'm assuming there's about 3 different ways we can do this, because in theory you should be able to invert. Can you just press invert on the vertex map?
Yes, that would be the first way. So let's actually get my render view up so we can see everything going on. So yeah, I'm pretty sure if we just go into our vertex map and invert it, it'll do it that way.
So that's the quickest way without having to do anything with materials whatsoever.
We can then also invert in here.
Oh, where's that? Okay, yeah.
Invert that way.
That's 2 ways. Yep.
It's 2 ways. And then we can, which material? I was in this material, wasn't I? We can go into here. So that's gone back, and we can use something called, if I could spell, I believe it would just be like an invert. Oh no, I don't know if it liked that then.
No, I think you'd have to physically swap the
No, so the
those
alternate is
two.
by using a ramp. And what the ramp's going to do is it can invert our black and white values.
Sweet. Or
So I think a color invert
completely
would have
bog
worked.
standard, swap the base and the layer one as well. So 4 different ways.
Yeah, so we could just swap these, wrong one, swap these colors over if we wanted to. Just a little one like
So
that.
yeah, plenty of
This
different ways
one.
to do that. Thank you.
Yeah, so what's nice about Cinema 4D and also about Redshift, there's multiple ways to do different things.
Yeah, depending on what it is that you would want to be able to create.
Yeah. What else
So
we got?
good question. Does the resolution of the polygon affect the noise of the field stroke vertex map? And the answer for that one I can answer is yes, because if you look at the cube that we have, you can only have a vertex map wherever there is a vertices. So if there is less vertices on this, there isn't the amount of geometry that you can create the yellow stroke red spots. So the higher the amount of polygons, the better your vertex map would be able to create information. How do you switch between the Redshift shader graph and the node editor?
Yeah. So what we can do, I mean, I guess the quickest way would be, let's say you've created your material and then you go to, where is it? Material. So with it selected, material, tools, convert material or convert and replace material. So convert material will give you a second material that is a shader graph material. Convert and replace will replace the one that you have selected. So let's just do convert material. And what we have here is now the equivalent, but the shader graph version. So node editor version, shader graph version.
Oh,
So yeah, that's the way.
cool. Thank you very much.
No worries.
Right, here's an interesting one. Is there any way to invade the new texture with light, like kind of glowing as it expands? Well, I suppose you would have to do some form of emission and glow on the whichever one you wanted to be the one that invades, wouldn't you?
Oh, as in, so like if the blue one was emissive.
I think so.
Yeah, so that would just be setting up, unless they mean just on those mix areas, which would be a little bit more
That would
of a
definitely be
challenge.
trickier, wouldn't it?
That would be more
The
tricky,
other
but
thing,
I could
sorry.
just show. I was going to say I could just show you how we could have one emissive and one not emissive,
Yeah.
and all it
Okay.
is a case, because with this setup, the perks of this setup, which is why I want to show it, is we can have completely different materials, completely different set of properties for these different textures. So for me, all I really did was change some of their base properties, and we can do that again by just sort of making this emissive. So a way of creating an emissive material is inside, if I can just pull this up, inside of your standard material or your RS material, we can do emission in both. We've got to come all the way down to our little emission option. And inside of the Redshift material, I believe there is an overall tab and it's inside of there. So let's just match our color because we want this to be a blue emissive material. Add some emission weight. We now have an emissive material, which is this is quite cool actually. And then yeah, so as it sort of like comes through, we have this cool like emission growing on here, which I like that. That's really cool.
And the other thing I like, because of course it's Vertex Maps and what we described the other day and its uses, you could use a displacer to use this vertex map inside the displacer. So as the new material comes across at the same time, you can increase or decrease its size. So it really looks like the new material is enveloping something or is eroding the thing around, which is really quite fun.
Yes, that is cool. And we could do that in the material as well if we wanted to. So if we just sort of like really quickly set up some bump on here, we could create that effect in the material without having to worry about our geometry. Yep. So let's say, let's have our emissive material have some kind of like bumpiness to it. So I'm going to double click and I'm just going to set up some bump really simply using some Maxon noise. So what's nice, inside of Redshift, we can access all of our different Maxon noise shaders. And again, I'm going to solo this just so I can see what it looks like, my little go-to that I always tend to do. And then let's do seam as always a nice one. And so what we're going to do, we're going to use this texture map, black and white map, to control bump on the surface of just our blue material. And so inside of standard materials, you know, when we have our material editor open, we have to enable our different channels. So if we want bump, we enable bump. If we want normal, we enable normal. Think of Redshift in the same way. If we want to enable bump, we need a bump node. So I'm going to double click and I can grab nicely named bump node. And all this is going to do, this is going to go in between my Maxon noise and my Redshift standard material. So I'm going to plug that into my input. And then this is going to go into my geometry bump map. And so now we have our bumpiness on top of here. So as we come to here, we have our bumpiness working. And again, it's going to blend into no bump, just like this did before. Hope that helps. Do we have any final questions on this before I? One last thing on Vertex maps.
There is one on Vertex Color, but I'm going to have to play with that one, I think, to figure out an answer. So,
okay, would you want to?
Yeah,
I was going to say, do you want to think of that while I do my little paint on texture thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Cool. Right, yeah, so one final little bit on sort of like Vertex Color, just because I think it looks pretty cool, is if I kick off my render view, what am I going to do? Yeah, let's get rid of this entire one now. And I'm going to bring up an existing cube that I have before. And what's on this cube is I'm going to open this up and you're going to be like, oh my God, there's loads of nodes everywhere. Don't worry. It's not that crazy. I can explain them. So I'm going to open up this node editor. And basically, all this node editor is, if we have a look at these, so if anyone's used texture maps before, it's basically a way of getting like if you create a material, for example, inside a substance, you can then export your different texture maps, which you can then use inside of renderers such as Redshift. So you can export things like your base color, which is also known as like diffuse and albedo. You can export roughness values, normal maps, displacement maps, which then all can get combined together inside of a Redshift standard material, which is literally the thing we were just looking at, and to create some really interesting, more what would perhaps say is like photorealistic looking materials. And so this is all this is. We have all of our different texture maps, and they're just plugged into the relevant settings inside of our material, which is then plugged into our output. So all this is just like this cool like painted material here. And then I got a equivalent version, which if we just, why does that one look strange? If we just solo this, it's like just like a rough sort of scratched version of that same material. And so we can take advantage of our vertex maps again by just sort of doing that same material setup. But then what we can do, we can use the brush and almost paint our own textures and materials and imperfections onto our material. So let's just quickly set it up. So I just want to explain what all these nodes are, because when you first open up, it's like, oh my god, there's loads of nodes, but really it's all just kind of the same thing. It's just two lots of the same thing set up. It's just two materials, that's all. So let's do our little blending again. So we're going to get our material blender, where we're going to plug in both of our materials. And then what we're going to do is we're going to grab that vertex attribute node again. And by default, it's not going to do anything, or it's going to go a little bit weird. Maybe pink. Okay, nothing's going to happen. That's fine. That's because we haven't set up our vertex map yet. So yeah, so it's giving us like a weird blend at the moment, but that's fine. That's cool. That's cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to go select, set vertex weight, set it to 0. And then inside of our vertex attribute, this is where, remember, we drop our vertex map. And so now what's going to happen is we should just get the original painted material. And that's because we have nothing set up on here. But if I double click my vertex map, we get given a sort of like a paint tool, which Matt showed us when we were doing vertex color. And we can sort of change this size, and we can come a little bit closer, and then we can start to paint on here. And now effectively where I'm painting, oh, ignore these little lines, it's just a issue I'm currently having with my graphics card. So yeah, where we're painting this new weight data, we're getting our second material. So I can just sort of paint in here, and we're now getting that secondary color. So this can be a way of, if you wanted to really sort of like paint on your textures and what you're doing, if you find that's a sort of a nicer way of working, then you could definitely set up this method and then paint on your vertex map, your vertex weight afterwards, and have a bit more control of where perhaps your different materials are going to be. So that was just a final little bit I wanted to show on that. Matt, do you have an answer to the vertex color question?
I did, yeah. I've answered directly.
Okay.
Because it's about baking out things and baking out materials. An interesting one.
Yeah.
Someone, Charles, has said he's always had trouble with blurring a vertex map inside of Redshift nodes. Can you do it inside of nodes, or would you just blur it with another vertex map and cheat?
I would cheat it with another vertex map and then use the second vertex map
instead.
Inside the vertex attribute. Yeah.
Which we showed 2 weeks ago?
Last week.
God, it was only last week.
Last week. Motion.
Wow. That seems like a long time ago.
Yeah, I'm trying to think how. I mean, so yeah, you could do it with a ramp, because the ramp then allows you to control those black and white knots, and then you could soften it that way. Yeah, so if I just sort of solo this, let's have a quick look, see if I can do this like super quick. Let's see if this works. I may be like mega lying here, but let me try.
Okay, hold on. We've got a caveat. Not just a vertex map, which works unless you are using a black and white map that is not a generated vertex map, aka a scratch map. So do you have a way of blurring textures, I guess?
Blurring textures. That is a good question. I mean, because I don't know how to do it in Redshift, I would save the texture map and blur it in Photoshop.
which is
would be my
exactly the
I mean,
suggestion
that
that's
would,
just come in.
that would be my. I mean, it's not ideal. How would you blur texture? If anyone knows,
It says he
let us
usually
know.
tries with 3 materials: one base material, a second material for some erosion, and then a final material for a deep scratch. Ooh. Yeah, I see
Isn't
what
that
you
just
mean. You
layering?
could.
So isn't that layering
Yeah, but that's
colors
what he
as
does to
opposed to
cheat.
blurring
If you could
them?
just have the scratch map and then blur out the outside of the scratch map for another material, you want kind of like a Gaussian blur thing, don't you?
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head. No, I can try and find out for next week though, because I'm
Yeah,
sure there would be. And so just like the outside area of it would need to be the outside of the texture
yeah. That's an
would need to be
interesting one.
blurred. That is interesting. I can try and find out
A fast box
because you
blur
could
would
use,
work
yeah,
in.
you could use a ramp in like radial or circular, and then tweak the black and white values to then create the edge. Maybe I'll have a
Don't
think.
know.
Yeah.
That one's definitely more your domain than mine. Um, I think that's it,
Yeah.
question-wise for that part.
Cool. Okay. So shall I dive straight into MoGraph color and color user data, and then we do some lighting stuff?
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Cool. Let me. You know what? Let me just save this, and I'm gonna just do like a whole new thing. Yeah, I can even upload these because I'm pretty sure these aren't on the project files at the moment. Okay, so let's have a look at color user data and MoGraph color. And so it's, when I say it's a similar kind of thing to what we've just been looking at, it's a similar kind of setup initially. So starting from scratch, just going to change everything to Redshift. And thinking of what to begin with. Okay, so let's begin with display color. I think that'll be the sort of like easiest thing to start with. So let's just grab a couple of different objects and grab ourselves a little sphere. Let's maybe go like 60. And then, actually no, let's start off with just the one object. That'll be a bit more interesting, won't it? And then I'm going to throw in a dome light, just so we can get some sort of normal lighting going on. And then let's just kick this off. And then we have just our little plain old cube here, not really doing a lot. So again, I'm just going to create myself a standard material. So you can use Redshift material for this if you wanted to. And I'm going to drop it onto my cube. And my cube is going to go grey, just default grey. So let's open up our node editor. And then what we're going to do, so we're going to be working with color user data. So that is a particular node that allows us to control and use the data from a variety of different sources. So like display color, we've got layer color, geometry ID, we have some MoGraph stuff. And so we're going to have a quick look at a bunch of them now. And then we can hand over to Matt for some cool lighting stuff. So let me just double click. I'm going to go color user data. I'm going to drag and drop this node into here. And inside of color user data, we don't really have a lot going on, but we do have access to a lot. So even though you're probably thinking, hey, there's not really a lot of inputs going on, well, inside of our presets, which is like our attribute name, similar to our vertex map, we have a bunch of different data information. So we have MoGraph color, index ratio, we have object color, display color, layer color, geometry ID, and we have some particle information too. We're going to start off nice and simple by just using display color. And so what we're going to say is we're going to then say, okay, we would like the display color data to be controlling the color of our Redshift material. So again, it's just gone this sort of like default off-white color. But if we go into our cube, so now we're back inside of sort of Cinema 4D, we're not even worried about Redshift anymore. We're going to go into our cube, into our basic tab, and we can go custom color, and then we can control the display color now directly in here. And the perks of this is it's once this is now set up, is we can now just duplicate our objects and drop on the same material and change the color really nicely inside of sort of the attributes, which is perhaps a place that we're more comfortable working with or working in. So if I duplicate my cube and sort of pull it out, all I have to do is come into this same basic properties, and then I can change my display color. Same material, haven't had to worry about going into Redshift again. Once it's set up, it's done. Then we can let's create like a different object. Drop on the exact same material, come into our sphere again, go into custom, and then we can now add our display color in here. And so this is a really nice sort of like artist and user-friendly way of really quickly setting up materials by just controlling the display color. And so all of this is defined by our color user data, which is set to display color. So it's taking the information of the display color and it's piping that into the color input of our Redshift standard material. And so all of these materials are going to have, all these objects are going to have the exact same base properties, potential downside, but it is a nice quick way of just setting up some quick color. Once we've just set up the color user data information, we can use that same material on all of our objects, and then we can change the color based on our objects in a nice quick way of working. So that's one of the sort of faster ways and the potential upsides of working with color user data. And so Jonas actually showed me this today, which I thought was really cool. So I wanted to include it in today's Level Up workshop. But a big part of this is actually going to be using what's called MoGraph Color. And so we can use MoGraph Color inside of native and standard Cinema 4D as well. We can render it out. But I want to show you how you can access it inside of Redshift using this color user data information. So let's just set up, just for speed, let's set up our simple little MoGraph setup here. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab ourselves a cube, 20 by 20 by 20, and then I'm going to clone it. I'm just going to clone this cube and 20 by 20 by 20. So this is just a really quick setup, which is why I'm going super fast. So cool, we have our MoGraph set up here, just looking normal. So now what we're going to do is, let me just dock this so we can see everything and we can sort of access everything all in one go. I'm going to drop my material onto my cloner, kick off my render view. And now inside of my color user data, we can take what's called MoGraph Color. And so if I change this to MoGraph Color, everything is going to go white. And that's because we haven't really defined any sort of color or change or anything inside of our MoGraph setup. And this is really important. When you work with MoGraph Color, you need to set up a couple of other steps as well. So let's grab ourselves a plane effector. And we're going to have it just scale down, uniform scale down some of our cubes. And then what we can do, we can come into our fields. And so at the moment, our color mode is set to fields color. So actually, you know what? I'm going to switch this off straight away. I'm going to take my material off first because I want to show you something. So back inside of my field, we're going to grab a spherical field. So spherical field seems to be like my little go-to today, but I'm liking it. I'm feeling it. So now what's happening? So we've cloned our cubes. Nice, easy setup. And we've got a plane effector, which is scaling our cubes down by a value of -0.5. And then we've used a field, which is a spherical field, which is controlling where that effector is having an effect. So which of our cubes are actually going to be affected by our plane effector. So we can see here, we're getting some color as well. So inside my parameter of my plane, my color mode is set to fields color. And so inside my field, I can actually adjust the color in here. So I can change the color, I've got a little rave going on, or I can do a gradient. So we have a black and white gradient, or let's do a little rainbow gradient. So we have a little rainbow gradient going on. However, if I just take off my color user data, so I'm going to unplug this for now. So this is just a normal standard material. So we've set up our lovely color. We've just spent ages, making the world's best MoGraph setup. Drop it on my cloner, all my color disappears, all it goes away. So how do I get this MoGraph color information back? Because I liked the colors that I set up. Well, this is where we use our MoGraph color data inside of our color user data, plug it into our color, and then we now have that color information controlling the base color on my standard material, still with full control over my actual material properties. So I can have a metal material. We could, make it like a brushed metal by increasing our roughness, etc. As well as, plugging in a variety of other things like surface imperfections, scratches, smudges, etc. So this is where it can be really kind of powerful. And then now, as I move my spherical field, it's going to be moving all of this color. We can even colorize it again in here. So let's say, okay, I don't want to have to keep coming into my color remap. I want to control my colors inside of my material. Well, what we can do is, again, we can use that lovely little ramp node, drop that in here, and then our ramp node is going to now colorize these different elements. So again, let's just load let's do something different just so it looks a bit different. Let's go with, I haven't really got a lot of options here, have I? Let's go with that sort of little fire one. So now we're colorizing this inside of here. So what if we want to take this a step further? What if we want to, I don't know, make it like emissive? So emission was talked about in the last sort of like thing with Vertex Map. So let's talk about emission for this. Let's say we want some of these bits, or where my spherical field is, we also want them to be an emissive version of this material. Well, this is where we can use good old Material Blender, as I said, which can come in handy for a variety of different options. So we can get our Material Blender, plug that in there, and then I'm actually just going to duplicate this entire setup. So color user data, ramp, and standard node, duplicate the entire lot. So this is now the exact same thing as this. Let's solo it so we can see that. We can see it's the same. Now what I'm going to do, inside of my second setup, I'm going to come all the way down and I'm going to add some emission weight. It's going to go crazy because I need to also define my emission color, which at the moment is just set to white. But I can use this same setup to control the color now of my emission. So the way we do that, highlight it over the top. Inside of emission, we go to emission color. And if I just solo it, we can now see we just have it the exact same thing, but like an emissive version. You're probably thinking, Ellie, where are you going with this? Well, just trust me, trust me. So we're going to plug this into my material color. And then finally, we're going to use this color user data. I'm going to grab myself a ramp. And my reason for using the ramp is because I want it to be a grayscale. So I could just make this grayscale inside of here, but I'm just going to do it inside my material. So now we have a grayscale version. which we can then use as a mask. So similar to when we talked about the vertex attribute, where we have our black and white values, therefore we can use it as a mask like we do in Photoshop. We can now do the same thing with this because the ramp has made it black and white or grayscale. So I can use my grayscale as my blending mask. And now, as I move my spherical field, we are now blending between that emissive version and that, non-emissive version using this field. So we can use MoGraph Color to really kind of take our MoGraph setups to that sort of like that next step up and that next level by using color user data. Right, okay. Any questions on that one before we have a quick look at two more final things?
Okay. Yes. How would you assign random colors to the cube, to all of the individual cubes? Can you just swap out?
You read my mind.
There it is.
You read my mind. That was going to be the next thing. Okay, let's do it. Let's do it because it's cool and I really like showing this. So what I'm going to do, just for the sake of this, we don't really need this stuff. And I'm going to create a new material just so when I share this project file, you guys can have a bunch of different options. Okay, so as we can see, all our cubes are grey. Not looking very interesting. Well, color user data has an amazing setting called Geometry ID color. And what it's going to do, it's going to assign a random color to every individual geometry ID. So every individual cube in our case. So let me set this to a geometry ID. And then we're going to plug it into color. And then now we just have a whole random selection of colors inside of here, which I think is really cool. It's really cool because then what we can do, we can again colorize it with our own palette or gradient or anything. So you'll see, you notice I use a ramp node quite a lot. So the ramp in this case we can use to then create a really cool looking color palette. If you've already got your own, you can save a preset, create your own color palettes on here, and it's going to randomize these colors entirely. Then what we can also do, if we left this as black and white values, we can use those as a mask. So here, as you know, as we're talking about in our material blender, and also in color layer, you can do blending in color layers as well. We could use these different black and white and grayscale values to use as our blending color in all of the previous setups we just looked at, where we look at black and white values and grayscale values and what we can do with them. And so like in this case, so a cool thing, I feel like I'm just playing now. So I'm going to drop this back into here. And then, so where we have our black and white version now, we could use this to control the different roughness values of our different cubes. So what's interesting when we have black and white values or grayscale values is we can't just use them. We don't just use them in color. We don't just use them in masking or in blending, but we can use them in a wide range of different properties. So inside of our standard material, let's talk about reflection, like reflection roughness, because that's the most kind of noticeable setting when we start to adjust it. So we have no roughness, super glossy, full roughness, super rough. These values go between 0 and 1. And what's interesting about that is we can then use grayscale values, which can be translated into numerical values between 0 and 1. And what I mean by that is, on this ramp, everything that is 100% black represents a value of 0. Everything that is 100% white represents a value of 1. Everything in between as a grayscale represents a value between 0 and 1. And what the importance of that is, if I now take this black and white version of what we've just set up, so our black and white version of our color user data, we can see we've got different values, we've got different grayscale values. If I plug that into my roughness input, we're going to get random roughness values between 0 and 1 across these cubes because of our color user data. So I can show that by plugging this into our roughness value. And so now we have some areas that are going to be rough and some areas that are going to be glossy. Cool. Cool. Right, so one final thing I did want to show before I hand it over is
Can I interrupt? Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Can you control, when you do a ramp or a gradient, can you control its mapping? Yeah, okay, so you've got mapping on the right hand side. Have you got the ability of changing that to something? How does it do there? Okay.
What would you like it set to?
Shader space. Sharon's come up with an interesting question. If you had something like a terrain, like a landscape, and you wanted to put a gradient on it, so that the high tops are white, the middles are different, something else, and then it's darker, so that the ramp has to work vertically instead, how would you do that? Now, Sharon, to answer your question in a non-Redshift way, if you go to the asset browser, I don't know if you just want to just show this quickly, Ellie. If you go to the asset browser and search for landscape, there is that modular landscape has a texture that will do that, but it's not Redshift. But I don't know if it would give you a starting point that would allow you to at least play with that and figure it out. So that's why I was just looking, because there is a rock and snow texture with color and bump and things like that, and its masking space is object in a direction of 0, 1, 0. I don't know if there's a way of translating that into Redshift. So if you look at the rock and snow material on that one, and then bring up color, look at that, then you've got the layer mask, and that has the object space and then the direction of the object space that you can control where the gradient kind of creates itself. I have no idea if that's possible.
I think you can just use a state node. Let's just do it, because why not?
Charles has just said Adrian has a video on YouTube that shows how to use the RS state node for this.
Cool, that's cool. Right, let's just be basic, grab ourselves a normal material. I'm pretty sure I can just use a state node, plug this in, and then what would I want to do? Is it going to be my normal?
I mean, can you then control, I don't know how you control the...
Okay, yeah, then you can just make it black and white. Is this going to do what I wanted to do?
So then how do you control that goes up or down? Ooh.
It is going to work. I'm determined. Let me get a bit more of a...
Charles said, IIRC color split, the ray origin G is vertical. I hope you know what that means.
Oh, okay. Yep, I'm with you. I'm with ya. Color splitter. And let's go normal. And let's go
G.
G. Oh, mine's having a bit of a meltdown. Oh, it's soloed.
Ooh.
Yeah.
And now if you choose,
Good stuff. Oh, input to control this a bit more.
good grief.
Success. Good teamwork, everybody. Yeah, so
I'm genuinely impressed with that. Nice one. Well done. There you go, Sharon. Hope that helps.
Love this. So yeah, and then obviously not in there, but in your material blend or mask or any blend, you would use that to blend between your two textures. Thanks
That's
to
incredible.
everyone who had an input, Charles and someone else. Thank you. There was someone else.
Sweet.
Cool. Right, so I do have one final thing I wanted to show, and I think I might just show it because I know, Matt, you have some cool stuff that you want to show with lighting. So I think I'm just going to...
Mine won't take long.
Cool. So let me try and remember. My organization and naming is not a strong suit of mine.
Hey.
Anyone that's been on the session of mine probably knows that already. Right, let's have a little go. So this was a really quick setup that I did sort of about 20 minutes before the session because I wanted to show some cool uses of color user data. So what we have here is one material. So all we've got is our normal, we've got like when I say a normal MoGraph setup, all I've got is individual objects and they're inside of a cloner. And the cloner is just set to linear, count 8, because we have 8 objects, and they're dynamic just to make them come in together. And my purpose for this is because I wanted to then use like color user data on my cloner. I could have also used a fracture, but I didn't. So let's take a look at what is going on here. Again, looks a little bit crazy, but
Holy macaroons.
It is not that crazy. So what I'm going to do, we're going to create one version of this because this uses this stuff here. So let me just have a quick look at cool. So let's just create one level of this. So I'm going to drop this on my cloner, kick this off, and everything's going to go grey. Cool. So what I'm doing here is I think I was using the index ratio. Pretty sure I was using the index ratio. Yes, index ratio of my objects. So inside of the cloner, you can go to display index ratio, and it gives you an index ratio of each of these. So we're taking that information, we're taking that data. Just drop this. Actually, no, I'm not gonna dock it. Okay, so let's grab color user data. And we're going to change our color user data to MoGraph index ratio. And if I solo this, we're going to get a really cool grayscale sort of color values across here. Then what I did was I used these inside of a ramp and I really dialed in the black and white values to define which exact object I wanted to be which material. So what we're going to do, let's just set up 2 really sort of simple textures here. So we've got a nice, oh, I like that color, a little pinky color there. And then we're going to grab let's do a more sort of this sort of color. Oh, I like that one as well. Okay, so then what we can do, good old Material Blender. See, my life revolves around Material Blender and ramps, as you're probably all experiencing today.
Material Blender, ramps, and spherical fields. That's it. It's all the magic, isn't it?
I never used to use the spherical field, and this entire workshop, it's like all I use. I'm like, Ellie, God, get a new field. Okay, cool. So yeah, we've got our two textures set up, really simple, just two different colors inside of a material blender. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to use this color user data inside of a ramp as my blending mask. But we're going to do some little magic first. So I'm going to plug this into here, and I'm going to solo my ramp. And my purpose for this is I want to create one entire, we want to create like 100% values, really. So the way that I can do that, if I just pull that over, we can grab these two knots. Interpolation, instead of smooth, I'm going to set it to step. That's because I want to have a really sort of block color going on. And if we sort of move these around, we should be able to do it where, so this needs to be white, middle needs to be white, and outer needs to be black. And let's see if we can, oh, here we go. We have just one object. So now we have that one object. I can now plug this into my blend color. And now I've decided that I want this exact object here to be this exact material or texture. And that's basically what the entire setup was before. So if we take a look at this, different materials inside of a material blender with the color user data inside of the ramp. I ended up changing it to scalar data because we're only using grayscale. So, but it doesn't matter. I was going to go off on a tangent there. Doesn't matter. So if I open up my color user data, so yeah, scalar, basically you can take the index ratio of scalar if you're not too fussed about color, but I just showed it with color, which is fine. And so if we get rid of this, kick this off, all we have here is our little material blender with our base color, which is the little pinky one here, which are these little two here. And I've used a couple little imperfection maps, which is something we're going to go over next week. We then have this second color, which is this sort of one at the back, again, which has its own little bump material. Again, the reason why I like to set up multiple materials and multiple different material blenders is because then I can have full control of all the brace properties of my different materials. And so this one here, this one's got like a little bumpiness value. I don't know, did I even do like a render? Did I do a little test render? Yes, I did. Okay, so I can talk about it like this actually. So yeah, this, hopefully you guys can see, we've got some little like bumpiness values on there. Good shortcut there, really. And then we have these materials, which has a fabric bump on, etc., 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 all to create these different things. So this is where you can take color user data and MoGraph to kind of like that next level and combine it with all of your little lovely magical tricks inside of materials. So yeah, I didn't want to spend too much time on that because I know Matt's got some really cool stuff to show. But are there any questions on this particular thing?
Not currently, no, I believe. So thank you very much for that.
Good stuff. Cool. So do you want to take the screen from me?
Yes, I'll steal it.
Steal it from me.
Somehow.
Also, I do want to say, so these shapes here, I didn't actually create them myself. They are from Sketchfab and a guy or gal or person called Digi. They are free to download, but I wanted to credit them. So thank you so much. I love them. And they were, yeah, when you have sort of like 20 minutes to create something quickly, Sketchfab.
Indeed. Speaking of 20 minutes to create something quickly, let's see what I can do with lights in the next 20 minutes.
That's the sweet spot.
That's all right. And I'm assuming you guys can still hear me and see me.
Absolutely.
So we've looked at lights before, so I'm not going to go into too much about individual lights and things like that. But I'm going to go how to kind of use lights to create interesting effects. And this is, working with color, and that's kind of why we're doing this, because color is very important. And so in my standard layout, I am on a standard Redshift, standard renderer as well. So please note that stuff down here changes depending on the renderer that you use. So I am using standard renderer because I want to create a floor. Boom. Okay. And then I'm going to create a very simple area light. And this area light, I'm just going to rotate and make large. There we go. So one thing that we didn't cover, or at least I don't think we covered, and if we did, I can't remember that we covered it, in the beginning R25 session, is lights and visibility and noise and things like that. So at the moment, this light is just happily projecting a very bland white light across the floor. That's great, that's no problem whatsoever. What we can do with lights is, of course, change their color. So I can make red light, I can make blue light, I can make green light. It doesn't really make much of a difference in this particular instance, but you can quickly use lights to change the color, the tone, and the emphasis of your scene. So having a stark white light is one thing, but having, slight, maybe too much of a green tint or bluey tint or reddy tint will affect the mood of your light, of your scene. And that's obviously what working with color can do. It can affect mood. That's great. But let's have a bit of a play with some more interesting things. One of which is the ability of making our lights have some noise. And this noise can be viewed a couple of three different ways: illumination, visibility, and both. Visibility means that the light will become visible, so that we'll actually be able to see where this light is, which I don't think it'll do for an area light because it doesn't know how to do it, which is not exactly what I expect. Both, or illumination. Now, illumination is a fun one because it says, okay, you want this noise to be part of something illuminated. And now if I render, I get this noise projected onto the ground, which is quite a fun and interesting technique to use. Something that you can do and play around with is turn this into wavy noise or hard turbulence, and now we get a more interesting effect and a different type of noise. And you can increase the velocity and how much stuff moves and the number of octaves. Octaves is the amount of detail, so you can see that that makes it very 1960s trippy. The more octaves you have, the more amount of information and layers of noise you get. But a quick thing I like to do is whack up the brightness to 100%. Ooh, look at that, it's the same color all the way across. What's the point? Well, whack the contrast down just to invert it. And there we have a different effect that's a little bit more spidery and electrical, particularly if we change the color a bit. So let's make it a bit blue. Oh God, maybe not that blue, but a bit bluer. And there we have very quickly just visible light that in theory should move and create some form of interesting effect, which can be, really interesting if you just want to create artistic patterns on, certain objects and things like that, or if you want to change the way that your scene works, for example, making it look like it's underwater. So this is a great kind of effect here, which works really nicely. What about if we want to add more color to the scene and make it look like it's underwater? Well, quite simply, we add an environment. And in this environment, we enable some fog. Now, this fog at the moment is just set to white, so the scene will disappear off into the distance and get thicker. And this strength is obviously controlled by the strength here and then rendered. And the distance is how far off into the distance do things start to disappear. So I can increase and decrease that, and that's halve that or quarter that, so that it starts to, ooh, no, press the wrong button. Let's 200, ooh, maybe not that much. So things start to disappear much closer to the screen. And if we here add a nice bluish texture, and let's whack that back at 5,000. No, that's 500. And press render, you can see that stuff starts to disappear. And just simply by working with color, which is what this was, I've given a nice sort of interesting underwater scene that can give you some interesting, maybe that was too big, effects for creating scenes and working with color. And the different types of color will of course make interesting effects. That is a super quick way of using lights in that way to create, you know, scenes and things like that. Are there any questions before I move on to volumetric lighting? I told you that was super fast.
Freddie was wondering, in Redshift, can I do this noise in the light?
I don't know. That's a question for you.
It is, yeah. So I was busy answering questions. What noise did you do in the light, please?
Okay, so in the light, I have the ability of turning on noise and causing noise to have illumination. And so that projects. If I have none, then it's just projecting a blue light. However, I have noise inside of my light, and I can choose that to have illumination. So it's projecting noise onto a surface.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, so there are a couple of different ways you can do it. You can do it with like what's called light gobos, and so you would have like a noise texture or any kind of like gobo texture, and you can attach it to the light in there. Yeah, that's how I would do it inside of Redshift.
Okay, so it is doable. Cool.
Yeah, just using what's called like a gobo. So inside of the area light, there is a option to add a texture. You just need to find like if you search like light gobos, it will come up with these sort of like grayscale textures, or you can make your own in Photoshop. And then yeah, plug that in there, and you can basically create this exact same effect here.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you very much. Right, so let's move on to volumetric lights. Now, what are volumetric lights? Volumetric lights are lights that have volume. Yay, I know, silly question or silly statement, but nonetheless true. So let's create a light, and let's create, it's an omni light, and let's go to our visibility. And our visibility has visible, volumetric, and inverse volumetric. Visible is what you'd expect. I render it, the light is visible. Hello. If I go to, you know, create myself a simple floor again, floor blob, and let's move that light up. Not only does it illuminate, but the light itself is visible. So visible lights, you can control the, you know, the size that is great. So if you want like a little firefly or moving around, or tiny LEDs or things in the distance, you know, that works quite well. It doesn't, as you may have noticed, it doesn't change the amount of light that's actually emitted. It's just how big the visible part of that is. Now, what about the other settings that we have under visibility? So go to General, Visible, we have Volumetric. I'm just going to get rid of the floor again because I no longer need it. Let's focus in on the light and render. It looks very much like it did before. So why do I want volumetric lighting? Well, volumetric means that this light, the visible light surface, now has volume. That means that if something gets in its way, like a sphere, it will create that shadowing effect. So the light itself has volume and understands that objects in the way will stop things from showing. So volumetric lighting allows you to create all weird and wonderful things like this, you know, halos. Oh, look at that, that's quite cool. Let's see if I can grab that and make it slightly closer to us. There we go, but it's still in there. It's easier on sideways and things like that because it's in the way. And there you can see you've got this volume creation. Going back to what I showed you earlier, we can add visibility into this, sorry, noise into this, and I can add illumination and visibility, or both. I don't have anything to illuminate other than the sphere, so I can choose just visibility for this, and you can see that my visible light now has noise with my sphere in the way. Ooh, didn't want to move both at once, only want to move the sphere. So visible or volumetric lighting gives a nice kind of effect to creating all sorts of weird and wonderful things, to the point where you can also work the other way around. If I go to my light and I go to general and I go to volumetric, I have inverse volumetric, which funnily enough is volumetric the other way around. So rather than it blocking light, light will look like it is emitting from a particular area. So that's quite a neat little trick that you can work with to create lights and color, and working with, like, obviously different colors and things like that, depending on how you want to work it. And if you've got lights that move from one kind of side to the other, you can get a really interesting effect. So let's just keyframe my light going from one side to the other. I suspect I'm going to need to keyframe it to go behind. So let's just do that. Yeah, so what I will do is actually just move my sphere in front of it, undo my camera, and let's make a very quick preview so that you can see what this does. Oh, that's the wrong sort of preview. Let's not do viewport renderer. Let's do full renderer so I can actually see it do it. I thought that was very fast. While that renders, are there any questions? Ooh.
I'm just having a look. So we're just chatting about gobos at the moment.
Okay.
I don't think so. Anyone got any questions? It'll come
So
pouring in
in
now.
my super quick setup, look at that. So you can make it look like you've got stuff projecting light from behind it because of the inverse volumetric, which is quite a nice little funky expression and a way of, you know, being able to work with color and different visibilities. Because the visibility stuff, if I go here, let's change my camera angle a smidge. Let's have a look. We should be able to add a gradient to this visibility as well. So we can change, funnily enough, the colors that our light projects out. So let's, I don't know, red to, ooh, didn't press that correctly, red to blue. And now I've got a different kind of halo to the inverse volumetric effect that this is creating. So you can add layers of color, there we go, still working with color, to the emission of volumetric light that this creates. And because I've still got control over things like the dots, I can increase and decrease the inner distance and outer distance of the volumetric light to create bigger, stronger, harsher gradients. And that very quickly is working with different types of lights, volumetric lights, and working with color with lights.
That's cool. That's cool. I mean, yeah, you can, and what's great is you can also do, if anyone who's wondering, similar things inside of Redshift as well, which I'm pretty sure we've covered in a wide range of sessions in the past.
Sweet. And
oh my god, are we going to finish on time?
I think we might just do.
I'm going to talk for 7 minutes just so we run over. Oh dear, that was really cool. That was a great session. Thanks everyone for all of your. I feel like we've had so many questions as well.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I'm sure I can speak for both me and Matt here. We love that. Like, we always like to like prepare as much content as we can, but then we're like, okay, let's save some time for questions, because that is our favorite bit, when you guys are like, hey, I've got this project, or how do you do this, or I have an idea, and then us getting to try and work it out live, which sometimes happens. But it is great. It's so cool. Is there a workflow for Redshift lights? There is. Should I? Should I?
Go on, we've got 5 minutes.
Should I? Why not? Why not? You know, I'm dying to do it. I'll do it super quick, because yeah, we've done it in the past in other sessions, so we can always link to it. But you know, let's do it. Let me just steal the screen. Where's my name? There it is. So let's do a similar, just like a super simple, similar type of thing. Let's move this out of the way so I can see what I'm doing. Right, let me just change this. This is all, well, that was non-important stuff, but changing your renderer, that's important. Okay, right, so let me have a think about how I'm going to do this. Right, so we need a couple of different things. So for a start, we're going to need, let's do a basic setup. A little plane, a little cube, just so we can make it look semi-interesting. Got this little bad boy. And then let's grab let's do an area light. And we're going to set it to a disk, and then we're going to target the cube. I'm wrong one. Oh, it keeps giving me the wrong thing. Go on, Ellie. This is what happens after 2 hours. My brain stops working. Right, let me target my cube. There we go. Third time lucky. Right. So we've got our little area light here going on. And so what we're going to do is we have to do a similar kind of thing. We have to set up an environment. And so what we have to do, we have to come into this little area down here, and we have something called a redshift environment. And everything's going to go pure white. It's going to go crazy. And that's because all of this depends on what's called a volume contribution. And that can be found inside of our lights. It can be found in pretty much any light, but we're using an area light for this. And what happens is, inside of our details, by default, the volume contribution is set to 1, which is a kind of big value. So let me pull this down, and let's also make our light, you know, I don't know, like 20, so it's a little bit less intense. So now what I'm going to do is, inside my area light, back in my details, I can start to up my volume contribution. And now we're creating that volumetric lighting, just like Matt had. And then we can come in and we can, again, you know, colorize this thing. So we've got this nice bright pink color. And then also a lot of this is dependent on our light. So it's dependent a lot on the intensity of our light. So you can see how the intensity changes how our volumetric lighting looks. It also depends on our volume contribution. So how much our light is having an effect on our volumetric lighting. So we can see here, I mean, that I kind of like how this looks, but we've got like quite a large value. So let's leave it, you know, let's leave it on not 32, on 0.2 for now. And then we can even have more control inside of our redshift environment. So we have scattering, attenuation, and phase, which are all related to volumetric lighting. So scattering is the amount of light scattering, attenuation is how much light gets attenuated through our fog or volumetric lighting. Phase is how we get forward scattering and backward scattering in relation to the light. So we can start to sort of mess with these values here, and it's going to be sort of controlling how much light gets scattered in our volume. So we can sort of pull this down, then we can have none, and now we're not getting any volumetric lighting. We can pull this up again, and then we have attenuation. So we sort of put this on my value of like 1, which is going to be way too big. So this is how much light, how far, think of this as how far the light is able to travel through the volumetric lighting. So we can see now it's sort of kept a lot closer to the source of light. And then phase is how we can get backward scattering. So what's happening is it's going back towards the light or away. I might have got that the wrong way around. Is then kind of going back away from the lighting is what your phase would be. So we can sort of see how it's slightly changing its direction. Cool. We have tint, we have emission, so we can have it sort of like self-illuminating, and then we're able to control different height values as well. And then finally, one final little teeny thing we can do is if we go into our materials, we create a Redshift noise volume. A noise volume can be placed onto our Redshift environment, and we can see how much of a big difference that made. And let's just for the sakes of this, let's use a Maxon noise instead, because represent Maxon. And so now what's happening is we've created this sort of like noise variation pattern going on, which we can then change and make a little bit more interesting. And we can remap this as well, so we can have it sort of smaller or bigger to create a more randomized and varied looking fog. And we can even animate this as well, so we have some animated fog going on. So yeah, super speedy way of doing it inside of Redshift. Important thing here,
That's awesome.
your light, volume contribution, Redshift environment, and if you want to add a little bit of variation, Redshift noise volume.
Yeah, you could color me impressed.
Oh, Matt. Oh,
Hey,
Matt.
I couldn't help it. It was there. It appeared. And I'm not here next week, so I had to get in my last pun of the series. So I just want to say thank you to Elly for having me and for all of her amazing setups and all of the question answering and things like that over the last 5 weeks. And I will be leaving you in Elly's capable hands for Redshift for next week.
Yes. So I know I'm gutted you're not going to be there. It's going to be like sad to finish us off without you, but don't worry, everyone. We're going to be doing an entire 2 hours on Redshift, so it's going to be so much fun. So we're going to be looking at, just really quickly, like as Garrick said, like trust Elly to break the time limit. It's not a Maxon training team session unless we run over. Do you know the rules?
That's what I said. Trainers never finish late. We finish exactly when we mean to.
That is the motto that we have on the back of our t-shirts. You just can't see it. So yeah, really quickly, plan for next week is basically just diving into a whole bunch of stuff inside of Redshift, getting started with it. And what we're going to do is, because as you know, I like to keep things super practical, we're going to take that steampunk arcade machine, which was modeled 5 weeks ago, which seems so long ago. Like I feel like this workshop's gone really quickly, but thinking back to that first week seems like ages ago. It seems like such a long time ago. So we're going to take that and we're going to basically create our lights, materials, and some cool stuff and look at it, rendering it out. And I feel like it'll be a nice way of us learning how to use Redshift, but also being able to create a project from scratch. And we can put the project file up there and you guys can take that and follow along, and we can do dome lights, HDRIs, area lights, node materials in a little bit more detail that we did today. And then we'll even look at how we can actually get that final render out and a couple of our little important render settings. So like sampling, GI, rays, bounces, maybe some globals, the important stuff that you want to first start looking at to start to optimize your renderers. So this has been a great week. I feel like this was a good 2 hours. I feel like we've been on for ages, but I liked it. And thank you so much, everyone. I feel like people were super interactive in the questions today, which was so nice. And yeah, once again, Matt, it's been a pleasure. Like I'm sad I'm doing the last session without you, but as always, it's been so much fun doing these with you. But
And
yeah,
you take care. Good luck for next week. Not that you'll need it, but you'll be fine. And yes, everyone be nice next week.
yes.
So thank you all for having me. Thank you all for your really interesting questions. It's great to try and figure out some of this stuff actually on the spot. It really it really is fun. It's it's kind of the bit that we really enjoy. So
Definitely.
for me and all of my cats, until next time.
Bye everyone. See you on the next one.
Bye.